Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Storyvella. Tonight, we ventured deep into the ancient soul of the Appalachian Mountains, with 8 chilling ghost stories that have lingered in these valleys for generations. These are not simple campfire yarns, but genuine encounters witnessed by mountain folk, coal miners, and families who have lived in these rugged ridges for centuries. Each story has been carried through bloodlines, whispered in corner stores, and sworn upon family Bibles by those who swear they live to tell it. These are the voices of the mountains themselves, echoing through the lives of real people who stumbled into something beyond human understanding in the mist-draped peaks and forgotten hollows of Appalachia. If you are joining us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to Storyvella for daily true horror stories exploring the most terrifying encounters across America. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when the darkness speaks. Now, let us step into the shadow of these mountains, where Cherokee spirits are said to wander, and the restless dead still pace beneath the pines. Here, every brook has a tale, and every ridge remembers what others try to forget. I used to laugh at the old-timers in the coal mines when they swore they could hear pickaxes striking in shafts long abandoned, their weather-beaten faces paling as they recalled sounds echoing from tunnels sealed shut for decades. Growing up in Pike County, Kentucky, you're surrounded by ghost tales of the hills and the things that move beneath them. But after 15 years underground, I believed the only things a man had to fear were cave-ins, toxic gas, and his own mistakes. I never imagined the dead would still be swinging tools in the dark. That was before I took the night shift at the Blackwater mine. It was October of 2019 when I first heard about its reopening. The place had been closed since the early 2000s after several disasters killed 3 men and drove the company into bankruptcy. But coal was booming again, and Pinnacle Mining bought the rights, pouring millions into bringing the old mine up to modern safety codes. They needed experienced hands for the graveyard shift, and the pay was too tempting to turn down, with Sarah, my wife, expecting our second child. The extra income meant we could finally leave the trailer behind for a real home. The first weeks went smoothly enough. Blackwater was unlike other mines I had worked in, older, far deeper, its passages twisting and splitting like the roots of some ancient underground oak. The coal seams appeared and vanished with no logic, as though the mountain itself enjoyed tricks. Still, the work was steady, and my crew, Johnny Briggs, Marcus Webb, and Dale Morrison, were solid men who knew their craft. It was one Thursday night in November when I first heard it. We were down about 800 feet in the eastern drift when the machinery failed again. The continuous miner had quit, so while Johnny and Marcus fought to fix it, Dale and I settled down for lunch in the stillness. A mine is never silent. There's always dripping water, timbers creaking, fans humming, but this was as quiet as it gets half a mile underground. That's when it started. A steady clang of metal striking stone, echoing faintly from deeper inside the mountain. "You hear that?" Dale asked, his light flickering nervously across the coal-smeared walls. I listened. There it was again, sharp blows of a pickaxe, then the scrape of a shovel. Someone was digging, but nobody else was scheduled anywhere near us. "Echoes from the main shaft," I muttered, though I didn't believe a word. The sound was too sharp, too close. It came from the sealed workings, the very sections closed off after the accidents 2 decades earlier. The miner sputtered back to life, drowning the noise, but the echo stayed with me for the rest of the shift. I kept straining for it beneath the roar. When I mentioned it to our foreman, Carl Hutchkins, he just shrugged and grumbled about old mines settling before walking away. But the sound came again the following night, and again after that, always at the same time, always from the same direction. Dale began finding excuses to work elsewhere, and I couldn't fault him. Something about that steady rhythm scraped at your nerves, made your throat go dry. It was Johnny who finally brought it up straight. "Look," he said during lunch break, "on Monday night, we all hear it. We know damn well it isn't machines or settling or whatever Carl's trying to sell us. Let's find out what it is. Marcus shook his head. Those workings were sealed for a reason, Johnny. 3 men died back there in 2001. Gas pocket blew and brought half the place down. Johnny leaned in. And that's exactly why we've got to check. What if somebody survived? What if he's been trapped all this time, digging for his life? The thought was absurd, but it planted something in me, a seed of doubt. I couldn't shake. What if it really was someone? What if we were ignoring a call for help because we were too scared to follow it? Against my better sense, I agreed to join Johnny. Just a quick look, I told myself. Just enough to calm the mind. The entrance to the sealed section was blocked by a thick concrete wall with "Danger, do not enter," scrawled in faded red. But moisture and time had cracked it, and Johnny had found an opening low enough for a man to squeeze through. We waited until Marcus and Dale were busy elsewhere, then slipped through with our headlamps and oxygen tanks. The air beyond was heavy and stale, thick with cold coal dust and the damp stench of long abandonment. Our lights revealed a narrow tunnel stretching into blackness. The supports old timber warped and groaning, as though they might give at any moment. Our boots echoed strangely, bouncing back from unseen corners, as though the mountain itself were mocking us. We had gone maybe 50 yards when it returned, the sound of pick striking coal, louder now, undeniably just ahead. Johnny and I locked eyes, fear plain in both of us. But we'd come this far. We pressed on. The passage opened into a wide chamber, a room carved by old mining grids. Our light swept across mounds of loose coal, rusting tools, and then what froze my blood. Scratched into the coal wall at the far end were dozens upon dozens of tally marks, grouped in 5s like a prisoner, counting days. And below, carved in shaky hands, were words gouged into the stone itself. Day 1847. Still digging. Tell Mary I am sorry. Johnny's light caught mine, and in that glow I saw the fear etched across his face. We both finally understood the truth of the story. Thomas Garrett, one of the 3 who perished in the 2001 accident, had once been married to a woman named Mary. His remains were never recovered. The clang of the pickaxe ceased without warning, and in the stillness that followed, another sound emerged. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy boots striking stone, coming closer out of the blackness. We didn't wait. We ran. My memory of that retreat is fractured, broken into flashes. Johnny tripped, fell hard, his headlamp dying instantly, plunging us into almost total dark. Behind us came the sound of ragged, unnatural breathing, echoing down the tunnel, not belonging to either of us. My chest felt like it would split open as I squeezed back through that crack in the concrete, every heartbeat like a hammer in my ribs. We never spoke about it again. Not to Marcus or Dale, not to Carl, not to another soul. We finished that shift as if nothing had happened, went home to our families, carried on in silence. But the noise didn't stop. Each night, without fail, the steady clang of that phantom pickaxe rang out through the eastern drift. More miners began to hear it, whispers turned to rumors, and soon the dawshift men refused to set foot in that section. Some quit altogether. 3 weeks later, a mine inspector came unannounced. Gerald Parks, 30 years in the business, a man who trusted his instincts. He understood danger when it sang in the air. When the pickaxe echoed during his inspection, he stopped cold, ordered everyone out. "There's somebody back there," he told Carl in no uncertain terms. Could be a trapped miner, could be trespassers. Either way, until we know, this drift is closed. A crew was called in to reinforce the concrete barrier, but before the work was complete, disaster struck. The eastern drift gave way. Nearly 200 feet of tunnel collapsed, burying everything under tons of stone and coal. The aftermath revealed signs of a massive gas pocket, pressure building unseen for months. Had it blown while we worked, it would have killed us all. The official record pointed to instability, bad supports, bad rock. But I know better. I know Thomas Garrett was warning us, laboring in death as he had in life, his pickaxe pounding out a desperate message. I never returned to Blackwater Mine. None of us did. The company sealed it for good, claiming danger and unstable geology. Yet on windless nights, folks still whisper of that hollow sound, a pick striking stone deep beneath Blackwater Mountain. I moved my family to Tennessee that spring. Sarah never pressed me on why I left Pike County so quick, and I never spoke of the tunnel or what Johnny and I encountered there. Some truths are too heavy to voice, some burdens too sharp for the living to carry. But I will offer this. If you ever work in the depths of the earth and hear the ring of tools where none should be heeded, do not chase it. Listen, the dead may be trying to save you, because ghost stories are not always stories. Sometimes they are warnings, and sometimes, by grace, that warning may spare your life. My grandmother's rocking chair had sat still for 3 years, so when I saw it moving that October dusk, I knew the mountains were shifting again, that something unspoken had returned to our homestead. Unraveling that truth would drag me back through generations of Morrison family secrets, hidden beneath the oaks that had guarded our hollow since before anyone living could remember. I had driven up from Asheville to finally clear Granny's place. I had put it off far too long, part busy life as a real estate attorney, part dread of facing her absence. She raised me after my parents died in a wreck when I was 12, and even at 87 she seemed indestructible, too stubborn and wise to ever truly leave. Her house rested at the end of a winding dirt track in Madison County, surrounded by ridges our kin had claimed since before the war between the states. Land like that would make any developer drool. Clean mountain air, a sparkling creek cutting through, timber enough to make a fortune. But the soil was thick with ghosts, and every timber groaned with memory. I arrived at sunset, the western sky glowing orange and purple, colors only mountains can conjure. The house was unchanged, as though Granny had stepped out and might return any minute. Mason jars of beans lined the counter, her spectacles folded beside her Bible. But it was the rocking chair that gripped me. It swayed, not wildly, not like a spectacle, but with that slow, steady rhythm of a body at rest. Back and forth, invisible hands tracing the same motion Granny's had 1,000 times. I stood on the porch, watching, waiting, chilled but strangely comforted. I remembered summer evenings on that porch, Granny shelling beans, mending torn clothes, telling stories, while her chair kept rhythm like a heart. The chair was family, carved in the 1890s by her grandfather Ezekiel from Cherrywood as a wedding gift for his young bride, Rebecca. Every joint flawless, every line smooth. Rebecca had rocked her babies in it, passed it down until it reached Granny's hands. That night, I slept in my old room upstairs, the house strangely hollow, almost holding its breath without her. I left the window open to the October air, half for freshness, half so I could listen. Around midnight, the sound came, wood creaking, the familiar lull of the chair. I rose, peered down. There it was, rocking under the moon, shadows stretching long across the boards. This time, I couldn't stay still. I dressed and padded downstairs, the house silent around me. The front door was open, same as always. Granny never locked a door, said in these hills it never mattered, because nothing could stay secret anyway. I stepped onto the porch, and the rocking halted at once. The chair rested completely still beneath the silver moonlight. For a fleeting instant, I felt ridiculous. Perhaps it had been nothing more than the wind, or maybe the old wood settling in some trick of creaks and shadows. Yet as I stood surrounded by the vast mountain silence, I sensed something else, something warm, close, and familiar, like the gentle embrace of returning home after a long and weary journey. "Granny," I whispered softly into the darkness. At that, the chair gave a single, tender sway. as though answering me. The following day, I devoted myself to sorting through her belongings, setting aside items in boxes labeled keep, donate, and discard. It was far more difficult than I imagined in labor, but in emotion. Every drawer held old photographs. Every closet concealed clothing that still carried the faint, sweet scent of her lavender soap. Every book I opened revealed margins filled with her careful script. It was in the closet of her bedroom, behind a tower of handmade quilts, that I discovered the wooden box. Crafted from the same cherry wood as the rocker, it bore carvings marked with the same painstaking detail. Inside, wrapped in tissue now yellowed with age, lay dozens of letters tied together with faded ribbon. The return address on the earliest envelopes sent a chill down my spine. E. Morrison, Brushy, Mountain State Penitentiary, Petros, Tennessee. My great-great-grandfather. Ezekiel Morrison, the very man who had shaped the rocking chair with his hands, had once been an inmate. The letters unfolded a story Granny had never revealed. In 1923, Ezekiel had been convicted of murdering a revenue agent during a raid on his moonshine still. Sentenced to life in prison, he had written faithfully to his wife Rebecca each week for 37 years. His words carried love, sorrow, and a desperate yearning for the home he could never return to. But the final letter in the box was unlike the rest. It was penned in Rebecca's hand, dated 1960, and addressed to Granny. My dear granddaughter, it began, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the duty of keeping our family's secret now rests with you. Your great-grandfather Ezekiel passed last month, but his death was not peaceful. He made me vow that when the time came, I would bring him home to rest by the rocking chair he carved for me, the chair where I waited through 37 years of his absence. The letter explained that Rebecca had indeed brought Ezekiel home in her own way. She persuaded the prison chaplain to give her a lock of his hair and a few small belongings, which she buried in the family cemetery behind the house. Yet even that was not enough for a man whose heart forever belonged to the mountains. He told me in a dream that he would return to that chair, Rebecca wrote. He said the love he carved into it would guide him home, and that as long as his bloodline lived in this house, he would keep watch from the porch. I read those words over and over before their weight truly settled on me. Then I stepped outside and looked at the rocking chair again, seeing it with new eyes. Its craftsmanship seemed all the more astonishing when you realized it had been wrought by a man shaping a promise to a wife he feared he might never see again. That evening, I sat in a straight-backed chair beside the rocker and spoke aloud to my great-great-grandfather. I told him of the family he never met, of Granny's long years and steadfast strength, of the great-grandchildren and even great-great-grandchildren who bore his name. I spoke of how the homestead had endured, despite offers from developers, eager to turn it into a resort. As I talked, the rocker began to sway gently at first, then with more surety, as though someone unseen had settled there to listen. And for the first time since Granny's passing, I felt wholly at home. The next morning brought an unexpected caller. Clara Hendress, Granny's nearest neighbor, appeared at the porch, carrying a covered dish, her face bearing the solemn look of one who comes with words that matter. "So you stayed the night," she said, lowering herself onto the steps. "Good. That chair's been restless since your Granny passed." "Restless?" I asked. Clara nodded toward the rocker. "Starts up every evening at sunset. Rocks for hours some nights. I figured it was missing her. Your Granny and that chair, they had themselves a bond." She studied my face before asking carefully, "She ever tell you about your great-great-granddaddy? About the reason he carved it?" I nodded, and relief softened her expression. "Good. Some secrets ought to remain buried, but not that one. That one needed the telling. Your Granny carried it for 70 years, never speaking of it. Yet she believed with all her heart that he did come back." "Do you think he did?" I asked. Clara gazed out across the endless ridges for a long while before answering. "I think love runs stronger than most reckon. I think when a man pours his whole heart into something, maybe a piece of him lingers there forever. I lingered in the mountains another week, and each evening I sat on the porch with my great-great-grandfather. The chair would rock, and I would speak, sharing news, asking questions, listening to the wind reply. And in that quiet motion, I found a peace I hadn't known since childhood. When departure day came, I could not bear to sell the place. Instead, I asked Clara to check in on it, promising to return whenever possible. Developers would have to wait. Some things, I realized, hold worth beyond measure. Clara later told me the rocking still comes alive on calm evenings, especially each October near the anniversary of Granny's passing, when the veil between the living and the dead grows thin in the mountain air. Now I drive up from Asheville once each month, always arriving at sunset, so I may sit on that porch and feel the presence of generations past. And when the chair sways with unusual vigor, I imagine them all gathered there, Ezekiel with his steady devotion, Rebecca with her tireless patience, Granny with her enduring wisdom, and all the others whose love bound them to this hollow. The rocker now keeps its own rhythm, not of hours or days, but of memory and family, of love that endures death and promises that echo through time. In these mountains, where secrets lie close to the earth, that is exactly how it must remain. Everyone local knows you never drive Copperhead Ridge after midnight, but at 22, full of beer and foolish pride, I thought myself above such warnings. That October night, in 1987, I dismissed the old folks who crossed themselves when the road was mentioned. I laughed at tales of phantom lights and ghostly cars, thinking them nothing but superstition meant to keep strangers away. I should have listened. My name is Danny K. Steele. I was born in Harlan County, Kentucky, where the mountains guard their secrets as fiercely as they guard their coal. My grandfather had mined those seams, and my father, too, until Black Lung took him when I was 16. Everyone expected I'd follow them into the shafts, but I dreamed of something different. College. A life beyond these ridges. The problem was money. Even with financial aid and a job at the garage, I came up short. That's when Tommy Burham stepped in. Tommy was a few years older, always with cash in his pocket and a sly grin. He had left school early to help with what his family politely called the business, though everyone knew it meant moonshine. The Brahms had been hauling liquor out of these hills since before Prohibition, and they did it well. Want to make some real money? Tommy asked me one evening as we lingered outside Maisie's diner, watching the last light slip beyond the western ridge. I got a run needs making, and my regular driver's laid up with a busted leg. I knew full well what he meant. Everyone in the county knew the Brum's liquor routes, twisting mountain paths carved by forefathers, generations before. It was dangerous work, not just for fear of the law, but for the roads themselves. Treacherous, narrow trails, some no wider than the car, with drop-offs steep enough to kill a man who took a curve too fast. What road? I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Copperhead Ridge, Tommy replied, and my stomach tightened like a knot. It was the quickest path to the Tennessee line and the safest route for avoiding the law. No patrols ran it anymore, not since the string of accidents. Everyone in Harlan County had heard about the accidents on Copperhead Ridge. Cars wrapped around trees, their drivers killed instantly. Vehicles that had burst through guardrails and rolled hundreds of feet down the steep mountainside. By the mid-1970s, after the third fatal crash in 2 years, the county had stopped maintaining the road altogether, and folks avoided it as much as they could. But it wasn't just the wrecks that kept people from driving Copperhead Ridge after dark, it was the legends. People swore that on certain nights, headlights would appear on that deserted mountain road. Lights that moved impossibly fast for the twisting switchbacks, lights that seemed to belong to cars that had no business being there. Not anymore. And if you were unlucky enough to find yourself on Copperhead Ridge when those phantom headlights came barreling down, well, that was when tragedy struck. My grandmother had warned me about it when I was a boy, back when she believed ghost tales might keep me out of trouble. She said, Copperhead Ridge had once been a bootlegger's highway during Prohibition, a narrow road connecting the Kentucky hollows to the speakeasies of Tennessee. Treacherous even on a clear day, but the money was good enough that runners risked it anyway. In 1923, a man named Silas McKay was making his run with a trunk full of moonshine when revenue agents caught him in a trap. They had staged a roadblock at the Tennessee side. When Silas spotted the lights, he knew his choices: surrender and face prison, or turn back and run for Kentucky. He chose the latter. The chase ran mile after mile, Silas pushing his loaded down car hard through hairpin curves while the agents pressed to run him off the cliffs. But Silas knew every bend and dip of Copperhead Ridge, every stretch of road. Somehow, even carrying 500 pounds of shine, he stayed just ahead. He might have made it out alive, if not for what came next. The story goes that just as he reached the ridge's peak, another set of headlights came toward him, another runner, heading into Tennessee, while Silas was trying to escape back into Kentucky. The road wasn't wide enough for both, and neither had time to stop. The collision was set to thunder through the valley, echoing like a storm. Both cars went through the guardrail, tumbling hundreds of feet before erupting in flames so bright they lit up the whole mountainside. Silas, the other driver, and both shipments of liquor were gone in an instant. When agents combed the wreckage the following morning, they found only twisted steel and shards of glass, but no body. Some whispered the men were thrown clear and scavenged by animals. Others claimed the fire burned hot enough to erase flesh and bone alike. But the mountain folk had their own belief. They said Silas McKay and the other runner never left. They were still up there, trapped in their last run. Headlights racing endlessly along Copperhead Ridge on misty, moonless nights. I never bought it. Ghost stories were for children and old folks with too much time on their hands. I was young, in college, and I knew the world ran on natural laws, not restless spirits. But Tommy was offering me $200 for one night's work. $200 would cover an entire semester's worth of textbooks. Just one trip, I told myself, climbing into Tommy's modified 1979 Camaro that Saturday night. Just one run, and I'd be flush enough to get through finals. The car's trunk was packed with 12 mason jars of the clearest moonshine I had ever seen, strapped down inside wooden crates and tied tight with rope. Tommy laid out clear directions to a cabin in Tennessee where a man named Wheeler would hand over the cash. A simple errand, he said. Nothing to fear. I pulled out of Harlan just after 11 p.m., taking the winding back roads toward the ridge. The sky was clear, the air sharp with cold, a sliver of moon hanging like a crooked grin above the mountains. The radio hummed with old country songs, the kind of music that seemed to belong on nights like this. Nervous but eager, I turned onto the narrow climb up Copperhead Ridge. Easy money, I reminded myself. One quick run, and I'd be richer by morning. The ascent began almost immediately, the road zigzagging in tight hairpins up the mountainside. Every turn demanded my full attention. There were no lights, no reflectors, only the yellow beam of my headlights carving through the darkness. To my right, the mountain rose like a black wall. To my left, nothing but a weak strip of guardrail stood between me and a sheer drop into the abyss. I'd driven mountain roads before, but Copperhead Ridge felt different. The turns sharper, the cliffs steeper, and the silence thick, pressing, unnatural. Even with the radio murmuring, it felt like the mountain itself was holding its breath. I was about halfway to Tennessee when headlights appeared in my mirror. At first, I shrugged it off. The road wasn't popular at night, but people still used it. Yet as I watched, unease gnawed at me. The lights were gaining too quickly, much faster than any sane driver could take those curves. Whoever it was, they either knew the road like Silas had, or they were reckless beyond reason. I eased to the right, tapping my brakes, giving space for the other car to pass. But it didn't. The lights only drew closer, filling my mirrors with a blinding glare. Finally, I swung into a turnout and waited. The car stopped 50 yards behind me, its beams frozen on the asphalt. I sat there, engine idling, watching. Minutes passed, no movement. Maybe they were broken down, maybe just as spooked as me. I pulled back onto the road. The headlights followed. This time, I watched carefully in the mirror. Something was off. The glow was wrong-yellowed and dim, like the old sealed beam headlights used in cars from the 1920s and 30s. I strained to see the vehicle itself, but every time I adjusted the mirror, the lights seemed to shift, as though hiding their source. All I could glimpse was a hulking shadow behind them, vague and dark. Static crackled through the radio, the music breaking in and out like a dying signal. I fiddled with the dial, and that's when I heard it, a voice faint but distinct slipping through the static. "Get off the road," it said. "Get off the road now." My heart jumped into my throat. The voice was male, urgent, and it sounded as though it came from inside the car with me. I scrambled at the controls, but the music was gone, replaced by dead air and faint static. The headlights behind me blazed closer, filling the car with their sickly glow. I pressed the gas harder, urging the Camaro faster along the twisting ridge. Yet no matter how I pushed, the other car held tight, its lights matching my every move. We crested the summit at last, and below, Tennessee glittered faintly in the valley. Just a few more miles, I thought. A few more miles, and I'd be clear. That's when I saw them. Headlights ahead, charging up the mountain at a suicidal pace. Two blazing orbs flying around curves at speeds no mortal car could manage. Ice filled my veins. I was trapped, one phantom behind, another rushing forward. The headlights tailing me surged, pulling alongside on a straight stretch. I turned on. What I saw nearly tore the wheel from my hands. It wasn't a car, not anymore. It was a carcass of twisted metal, charred black, as though it had burned in a furnace. Behind the wheel sat something that might once have been a man. Its face melted into ruin, its hands fused to the steering wheel by fire. It turned its head toward me. Where its eyes should have been, hollow sockets glowed with the same pale fire as the headlights. Its mouth opened, and the voice filled my skull. "Get off the road," it commanded. "Get off the road before he kills us both." The approaching lights were nearly upon me now, screaming closer with the roar of an engine that didn't run on gas, but on hellfire. I saw it clearly, was another ruined wreck, another phantom driver, burned and mangled, like the first, the second bootlegger. The one Silas had struck that night in 1923. 30 seconds, maybe less, before I was part of their chase forever. The cliffside gaped at my left, a plunge of 300 feet. My options were death or worse. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me when I was a boy. He had worked county roads, knew every inch of these mountains. 2 miles from the top, he'd said, there's an old logging road cut south toward Miller's Creek. Overgrown now, but still there if you know where to look. 2 miles from the top. I was almost exactly 2 miles from the top. My eyes darted over the roadside, desperate for a break in the trees. The phantom engines roared closer, drowning the night. Then I saw it. A narrow gap in the guardrail, nearly invisible. A dirt trail, clawing its way down the slope. I jerked the wheel right, the Camaro plunging off the pavement, jolting as it hit the rutted earth. Behind me, the crash came to phantom cars colliding, the sound exploding through the mountain like the crack of Judgment Day. The logging road was savage, pocked with potholes, clogged with branches, treacherous as hell. But it was real. It was earth, not haunted asphalt. I tore down it, branches whipping my windows, tires sliding through mud, until at last I burst out onto a county road near Miller's Creek. I stopped there, shaking so hard, my hands barely gripped the wheel. When I looked back, the ridge glowed, faintly against the night sky, as if something still burned up there, forever. I never carried that moonshine across the line into Tennessee. Instead, I wheeled the car back to Tommy Brum's place, left it sitting in his driveway with the jars still in the trunk and the keys tucked under the floor mat. I never gave him a word of explanation, never tried to tell him what had kept me from finishing the run, but I also never again took a late-night drive down a twisting mountain road. I graduated, took a job teaching, and got out of Harlan County, the first chance I had. But that night, on Copperhead Ridge, never left me, and I never let go of the belief that Silas McKay and that other long-dead runner are still out there somewhere, forever locked in a race that ended in fire and wreckage more than 6 decades ago. Folks in town still steer clear of Copperhead Ridge after sundown, and they still swap stories of ghostly headlamps and spectral crashes. The pavement itself has grown worse with each passing year, little more than a crumbling scar, and by now the county has given up pretending it can keep it open. Yet on crisp October nights, when the moon hangs thin, people say you can still glimpse lights darting along that abandoned road, headlights burning too bright, hugging the curves too fast, carrying their haunted cargo toward a finish line they will never reach. And if you're reckless enough to find yourself on that ridge when the lights appear, you best turn back quick, because Silas McKay and his eternal rival are still tearing through their last run, and they have no mercy for the living. Some roads were carved for the dead, and some debts can only be settled in the endless coin of time. On Copperhead Ridge, every night remains 1923, and every man behind the wheel is racing for his soul. Lost in a storm, I stumbled onto a cabin that spared my life until I tried to go back. It was February of 1994, during what the Weather Service would later declare the most brutal winter storm to strike the Blue Ridge in half a century. I was 28 then, working as a surveyor for the State Forestry Department, and I believed I knew those mountains well enough to handle whatever they might throw at me. My grandfather always warned that pride walks ahead of the fall. That February night I discovered how far a man can tumble when the mountains decide to humble him. My name is Robert Hayes, and most of my adult years have been spent tramping the forests of North Carolina, charting boundaries and counting timber for the state. It is lonesome labor, the sort that suits someone more at ease with trees than with people, and I was skilled at it. Perhaps too skilled, because I grew careless, taking risks a wiser man would have shunned. The job that set me on Grandfather Mountain that week was ordinary, a boundary survey for a timber sale in national forest land. It should have wrapped in 2 days, but faulty equipment slowed me down, and I pressed on, determined to finish before the forecasted snow rolled in. They had warned of flurries, not the roaring monster that came clawing from the north that afternoon. I was working 3 miles from the nearest service road on the mountain's eastern slope when the first flakes fell. Within the hour they thickened into a wall of white, erasing the world beyond a few yards. The wind whipped the snow sideways, blinding me, swallowing the landmarks I relied on. I should have stopped, dug in, maybe triggered my beacon, and called for rescue while I still had the chance, but I stubbornly pushed toward my truck, and that near-fatal choice almost ended me. In the first hour the mercury dropped 20 degrees, and the gale screamed through the barren trees like a living, starving thing. My compass wavered uselessly, its needles spinning wild, and the trails I knew vanished beneath piling drifts. 2 hours in, I was utterly lost in a blizzard that seemed to wipe the earth away. I slogged through knee-deep snow, fighting gusts that battered me at every step. The heavy coat I had trusted all morning might as well have been paper. It was no match for the 0 temperatures and slicing wind. Ice clung to my beard, my fingers numbed inside my gloves, and I felt the creeping hands of hypothermia. Just as I was about to dig a hole and pray for survival, I saw it, a faint ribbon of smoke rising between trees, barely visible against the ashen sky. Smoke meant fire, fire meant shelter. I pushed through a final stand of pines and found a clearing, and there, like a vision, stood a log cabin. Hewn logs stacked tight, seams filled with pale mortar that looked newly pressed despite the cabin's age. Warm light glowed in its windows, smoke poured from a stone chimney, and every line of it promised safety. I staggered to the door and beat against it with frozen fists, yelling above the storm. It opened almost at once. An old man with a white beard and eyes kind as any I'd seen stepped aside. "Good Lord," he said, ushering me in. "Get in here before the cold takes you." The cabin's inside was everything hope could conjure. A vast stone fireplace, burning bright, oak logs spitting sparks and shadow across the walls. Furniture all handmade, the table, cut from a single slab of wood. Chairs, stout and enduring. Shelves lined with jars, bowls, quilts. The air smelled of smoke, beeswax, and the sweet comfort of bread. His name was Samuel Whitfield, he told me, as he helped peel off my ice-stiff coat. He had lived on the mountain longer than he could count. What was I doing out there? I stammered out the tale, my survey work, the storm, the smoke I had followed. He listened quietly, while his wife, a small gray-haired woman named Martha, hurried to set before me steaming coffee and thick slices of cornbread dripping with butter and honey. "Stay till the storm's done," Samuel said, easing into a chair by the fire. "We don't see much company in winter, and we're glad to share what we got." The cabin was astonishingly comfortable for a place so remote. Oil lamps bathed the room in warm light. A pump in the kitchen drew fresh water, and every piece of furniture was crafted with the care of another time. The walls were hung with quilts and books, the shelves with tools older than me. I stayed 2 nights while the storm shrieked outside. Samuel and Martha treated me with the kind of grace you rarely see anymore. He told me he built the place after the war, back in the 40s. Raised 6 children under its roof, though all had moved on. "We've always favored the quiet," Martha said, serving stew and biscuits. "The mountains suit us better than towns ever did." On the second night by the fire, Samuel shared stories that stretched back centuries: Cherokee hunts before settlers came, deserters hiding through the Civil War, moonshiners running stills in the hollows during Prohibition. "This mountain remembers," he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "You just have to listen." The storm lifted on the 3rd morning, leaving 3 feet of fresh snow. Samuel walked me out to the clearing's edge and pointed toward a ridge through the bare trees. "Follow that ridge southeast for 2 miles. You'll meet an old logging road that'll take you down to where your truck should be." I thanked him and Martha for saving my life, promised to return, and set off. His directions were flawless. Within an hour, I reached my forestry truck, snow-buried but intact. It took the rest of the day to dig out, get down the mountain, and file my report. Yet Samuel and Martha haunted my thoughts, their kindness, the glow of that cabin. The next weekend I loaded my truck with gifts: coffee, sugar, fruit, a bottle of whiskey. I drove back, hiked in, but the cabin was gone. I searched the day away, circling the forest, but found no smoke, no cabin, no clearing. Perplexed but determined, I returned the following week, armed with maps and GPS. I laid a grid and combed every square mile of where the cabin ought to have been. There was nothing at all. I came across remnants of old hunting camps, deserted moonshine stills, and the skeletal remains of a few homesteads dating back to the early 1900s. But there was no trace of a log cabin belonging to Samuel and Martha Whitfield. My search turned toward the town itself, where I began asking questions of longtime residents and local historians, describing the elderly couple in detail. None of them had heard of a Whitfield household that matched my account, though more than a few mentioned families with that surname who had once lived in the region many decades earlier. It was in the Historical Society's small library that I stumbled upon the first true clue to what had taken place during that February blizzard. The librarian, Helen Morrisana, woman whose family roots dug 5 generations deep into the mountains, listened to my description with increasing intensity. "Whitfield," she murmured, her brow furrowed in thought. Then she vanished into the archives and returned, clutching a manila folder stuffed with aged newspaper clippings. "Here it is," she said, unfolding one for me. The article reported that Samuel Whitfield, aged 73, and his wife Martha, aged 71, had perished in a fire that consumed their cabin during a fierce ice storm in February 1963. Their bodies were found in the charred ruins. There was even a grainy black and white photograph of the couple, and the moment my eyes landed on it, my stomach dropped. It was them. Samuel, with his white beard and kind, steady gaze. Martha, with her gray hair pinned back and that same gentle smile. Yet according to the paper, they had been dead more than 30 years. The cabin had never been rebuilt. Helen went on reading from the account. The land, she explained, reverted to the national forest, the site left to be reclaimed by nature. Relatives, said Samuel and Martha, had always longed to be buried on the mountain that had been their life's love. I left that afternoon with directions copied down from the article, determined to find the exact spot. It took hours of scrambling through brush and following faint traces of forgotten trails. But eventually, I located the remains of the Whitfield homestead. What was left amounted to a moss-covered stone foundation, tangled in mountain laurel, and a chimney standing tall and solitary like a gravestone in the wilderness. Yet something else caught my eye. In the hearth, nestled between stones, blackened by time, were ashes, fresh ashes. I dropped to my knees, trembling as I sifted through them. They were recent, no more than days old, mixed with flakes of oak bark and charcoal that looked identical to the wood I had seen burning in Samuel's fireplace during the storm. As I stood among the ruins, the forest seemed to draw closer around me, filled with a presence both watchful and kind. A breeze moved through the bare branches, and in that moment, I could swear the air carried the scent of wood. Smoke mingled with fresh-baked bread. No explanation has ever satisfied me. The logical part of my mind insists I must have hallucinated the entire encounter. That hypothermia and exhaustion spun a desperate mirage to keep me alive through 3 perilous nights. Yet another part, the part that remembers the fires. Warmth, the taste of Martha's cornbread, the timbre of Samuel's voice as he recounted mountain lore knows better. Over the years, I have returned to that clearing countless times, always hoping to glimpse smoke curling from the chimney's crown, always straining to hear voices rising through the timber. Though I never found the cabin again, I found something more enduring. Acceptance that helps sometimes comes from places far beyond human reason. The mountains are keepers of secrets, and among them are secrets shaped not by malice but by a generosity that survives even death. Samuel and Martha Whitfield lived their lives in service to others, offering food, shelter, and comfort to travelers and neighbors alike. Perhaps that compassion was etched so deeply into their being that even fire could not consume it. Today, I still work as a surveyor, roaming the wild forests of North Carolina, but my steps are slower now, more reverent of the ancient power within these ridges. And on certain days, when I am alone in the back country and see smoke winding upward through the trees, I follow it. Not with the expectation of finding Samuel and Martha waiting, but with the knowledge of what they taught me during those 3 February nights. That survival can hinge on something as simple as a warm hearth and a stranger's kindness, and that sometimes strangers are not precisely what they seem. The cabin may have faded from every map and GPS, but its spirit lingers, waiting patiently in the timber for the next soul, lost in snow and fear. And here in the mountains, where mist blurs the line between past and present, that is exactly the way it should remain. Growing up in Dead Man's Hollow, one rule was carved into us from the start. If you hear your name called from the woods, you never answer. It was one of those lessons mountain children inherited like a family recipe or the location of the best trout stream, passed down from mouth to ear through generations. But like most teenagers, I figured I was smarter than the old superstitions. That arrogance nearly claimed me one fog-drenched morning in October of 1985. My name is Jesse Parker, and I was 15 that autumn, old enough to imagine I understood the world better than my kin, young enough to still believe life played by rules I could grasp. Dead Man's Hollow lies in the shadowed crease of two ridges in eastern Tennessee, a place where the fog clings stubbornly even on bright days, and where the trees knit so close together that noon feels like dusk. My family had farmed tobacco in the fertile bottomland for 4 generations, cut timber from the slopes, carved a living from soil once blessed by Cherokee prayers, long before my people arrived. The hollow earned its grim name back in the 1890s when 3 loggers vanished during a brutal winter storm. Their camp was discovered with meals half-eaten on the table, but the men themselves were never recovered. Cherokee elders claimed the forest itself had claimed them, warning that some places belonged to powers older than man. The settlers, stubborn as ever, ignored the warnings, kept clearing, kept building, until the mystery settled into legend. My grandmother, Nana Parker, preserved those tales like heirlooms. Born in the hollow in 1910, she had weathered the Depression and 2 world wars without straying more than 20 miles from home. She knew every trail in spring, every hidden cave, and which corners of the forest were safe or decidedly not. That hollow has voices, she told me once, as fireflies danced beyond the porch where we sat. Been hearing them since I was no bigger than a cricket. They call names, coax folks deeper and deeper into the old growth. I was 10 at the time, half believing in monsters under the bed, but skeptical of ghost stories. "What kind of voices, Nana?" I asked. Her face turned solemn. "Friendly ones," she said, "and that's the danger. They sound like people you know, your mama calling you for supper, your daddy asking for help. But if you follow, the woods take you where no map will show, and you don't come back." She told me of her own brush with those voices in 1923, when she was 13. Picking blackberries near the ancient hemlocks, she heard her mother's voice crying her name, pleading for help. She started toward it, only for her older brother to catch her arm and haul her home. Her mother, Nana explained, had been laid up with a broken leg all that day, unable to leave the porch, much less wander the timber. But that voice, Nana said, her eyes distant, it was her. Sounded scared and real as anything. I tucked her tale away with the rest of the mountain folklore that crowded my upbringing, stories of panthers walking upright, springs with healing waters, caves that led to other realms. Fascinating, but not binding on the life I pictured for myself. By 1985, I was a sophomore, captain of the junior varsity basketball team, and going steady with Sarah Mitchell, the prettiest girl in our class. I carried plans far beyond Dead Man's Hollow College, a career, escape from the shadow of old fears. To me, the ancient warnings were nothing more than stories, legends passed down through generations, were often dismissed as quaint relics from a time when people blamed spirits or curses for anything they couldn't explain. Yet that October morning began just like every other day. I rose before dawn to help my father with the chores, feeding the animals and milking the cows while the mist hung heavy in the hollow, clinging to the fields like something alive. After breakfast, I slung my .22 rifle over my shoulder and headed into the woods to hunt squirrels. Partly to bring back meat, but mostly to find peace in the quiet. At that age, I craved solitude, moments to untangle the storm of emotions that came with growing older and trying to plan a future I barely understood. The forest was stunning that morning, blazing with autumn colors, leaves painted in gold and crimson as far as the eye could see. I followed the familiar path up the eastern ridge toward the ancient timber, my boots crunching on the carpet of fallen leaves, each step releasing that earthy October scent of rot and soil. The fog was unusually dense, wrapping the trees in shifting veils, their trunks appearing and vanishing like ghosts as I moved. I had been hunting maybe an hour, with 2 plump gray squirrels already in my pouch, when I heard my father's voice drifting through the mist, sharp with urgency. "Jesse." His call carried clear through the morning stillness, sounding both worried and commanding. "Jesse, I need your help down here." I froze, then turned toward the sound, trying to trace it through the heavy fog. My father almost never came this far into the woods, preferring to stay near the farm where there was always work waiting. But there was a tremor in his voice, a strain that twisted my gut with concern. "Jesse, can you hear me, son?" The voice was deeper in the trees, in the direction of the old growth where the forest grew so thick sunlight barely reached the ground. I started toward it, careful with each step through the underbrush, rifle gripped out of habit. "I'm coming, Dad," I shouted back. "Where are you?" The reply came quickly. "This way, boy. Follow my voice." Pushing through a tangle of mountain laurel, I stumbled onto a narrow deer path I'd never noticed before, one that led straight into the untouched timber. The mist here was suffocating, no more than 10 feet of vision in any direction, yet my father's voice beckoned steadily, pulling me forward. "Keep coming, Jesse. I'm hurt bad. Need you to help me home." Fear clenched my chest at those words. My father was tough as hickory, 30 years of farm work without ever being laid up by an injury. If he was calling for help, it had to be serious. My pace quickened, boots crunching faster over the hidden trail, winding me deeper into that ancient wood. The trees were massive here, towering hemlocks and chestnuts that had stood since before the Revolution. Their trunks were wider than wagons, so broad it would take 3 men to encircle them. Their branches formed a canopy so thick that even autumn daylight barely touched the forest floor. The air itself felt older, heavy with moss, rot, and a strange scent I couldn't name. "Jesse, over here." The voice was close now, maybe 50 yards ahead, yet the fog was so blinding I still saw nothing. I called out, voice bouncing oddly between the trunks. "Dad, I hear you, but I can't see you. Keep talking." His reply came instantly, steady and commanding. "I'm right here, son. Just a little further." But unease crept in with every step. No matter how quickly I moved, the voice was always just ahead, always out of sight, never closer. And then, a realization struck so hard it nearly dropped me where I stood. My father had never once in his life called me Jesse. To him, I was boy, son, or Japheth, initials he gave me as a child. Jesse was my mother's name for me, what my friends called me, but never him. My blood ran cold. I stopped dead in the fog, heart thundering as the truth chilled me to the bone. Whatever was calling me, it wasn't my father. It was something else. "Jesse, why did you stop?" The voice came again, weaker now, carrying a strange flatness, like a recording played through a broken speaker. "I'm hurt, son. I need you." And under it was something hungry, a tone that made the hair rise along my arms. Panic seized me. I turned and tried to backtrack, searching desperately for the way out, but the deer path was gone. Every direction looked the same, gray fog swallowing colossal trees, with no markers to guide me. "Don't leave me, Jesse," the voice pleaded from behind me. "I'm your father. I need you." I stumbled blindly through the brush, heart hammering, searching for any familiar sign. But the forest twisted around me, shifting like a living thing. Paths appeared only to vanish. Places that should have been familiar turned strange and menacing. I wandered for what felt like hours, my throat raw from calling for my real father, my mother, anyone who might hear. But only the false voice answered, always close, always coaxing, urging me deeper into the old growth where no one would ever find me. By the time I stumbled onto a logging road I recognized, the sun was sinking and shadows stretched across the hollow. I ran until my lungs burned, not stopping until I burst through the kitchen door at home. My parents were there at the table, worry etched on their faces. "Where have you been?" my mother cried, clutching me tightly. "We've been searching since noon. Didn't you hear me calling?" my father demanded. I walked every trail in that hollow, shouting until I nearly lost my voice. And in that moment, I understood just how close I had come to vanishing like the loggers who disappeared nearly a century before. My family had been out looking for me, while something else had been using my father's voice to lure me deeper into the woods, far from any place a search party would ever find. I told them what had happened, the wrong name, the endless trail that shifted like a dream. They listened without disbelief, grim recognition in their eyes. "The voices are growing stronger," my father said quietly. "More folks gone missing lately, after following sounds that seemed familiar." The next day, when I told my grandmother, she only nodded knowingly. "I warned you about those voices," she said. "They're clever, learning more each year, sounding more like the ones you love. But they always slip, always get something wrong." She told me how others had been lured hunters chasing the sound of wives calling them home, children following what seemed like their friends' laughter, loggers obeying their foreman's phantom orders. The Cherokee had known, she said, calling them forest spirits, guardians of the ancient groves, who did not want mankind in those places. Most who follow never return. A few stumble back, telling stories like mine. From that day forward, I never again hunted alone in the deep woods. Never dared to walk into the old growth, where the voices whispered names and promises they could never keep. And when I had children of my own, I passed down the same warning my grandmother had once pressed into me. That if ever your name drifts from the trees, you must never, ever answer back. Because in Dead Man's Hollow, not every voice is human. Some are things that borrow the sound of kinfolk, like a hunter slipping into a disguise. Things that bait with comfort and ensnare with trust. And once you let yourself follow those voices into the ancient groves, where the oldest trees whisper secrets, you risk becoming part of the woods yourself. Just another echo, calling out to the next generation of wide-eyed youngsters, who believe they are wiser than the old. The hollow still carries names on its winds, still beckons the unguarded into its green maze, where time bends strange, and wanderers are swallowed into legend. But in our bloodline we have learned better. We have taught ourselves to hear not just the words, but the cracks between them. The subtle slips that reveal the false from the true. And on gray October mornings, when the fog clings low and the branches drip with mist, we keep our children close and remind them of the law of these hills. If the forest calls your name, you turn away. For not all invitations are meant to be accepted, and some voices must forever go unanswered. My wife was slipping away in childbirth when an old woman appeared at our threshold, claiming she had been catching babies in these mountains for 70 years. It was a bitter March night in 1978. The roads churned into rivers of mud from the thaw, and the nearest hospital, a good 40 miles across passes that even mule trains would dread. Rebecca and I had been wed 3 years, and this was our first child, the blessing we had prayed for after 2 miscarriages that had nearly broken our spirits. My name is Thomas Caldwell, and I was born and raised under the shadow of Mount Mitchell in a valley so tucked away that when the weather turned foul, our mails still came in by horseback. Rebecca and I had built our home on family land, 40 acres held since the 1840s, good soil that fed us season by season. I made my living as a carpenter, sometimes lending a hand to neighboring farms, while Rebecca kept the garden, raised chickens, and canned enough each summer to see us through long winters. We didn't need much, and we didn't ask for more. Hers was a laugh that could brighten the gloomiest day, and she filled the rooms with wildflowers in the warm months and the scent of bread through the cold. When she told me she was expecting, it felt as though God himself had placed the last piece of our puzzle. But the pregnancy was never easy. The sickness clung to her for months past what the doctor said was normal, and she was built small, narrow-hipped, a fact that troubled old Dr. Morrison, who came through the valley once a month on his rounds. He was in his 70s, had delivered babies since before the war, and he warned us plain. If the child comes early, or if trouble starts, you may not have time to reach a hospital. You ought to think about staying in town till the baby's born." But Rebecca shook her head. She wanted our child to take its first breath in our own cabin, with the mountains standing guard, as they had for our kin before us. She was rooted in the land, stubborn as oak. The labor struck on a Saturday evening, in early March, right in the teeth of one of those late storms that drop 2 feet in half a night and turn the world into a Christmas card. Rebecca had been restless all day, pacing, uneasy, as if her body already knew. By nightfall, the contractions began, steady and fierce. I sent a message to the doctor through our nearest neighbor, but word came back that Morrison was trapped by snow 30 miles away. We were alone, armed with nothing more than a medical guide Rebecca had ordered by catalog and whatever scraps of mountain lore had filtered down through the years. Hour after hour passed. Rebecca was as tough as ironwood, but by midnight, something was clearly wrong. The pains came sharp and fast, but the baby wasn't shifting as it should. She grew pale, her breath shallow, and I saw the fear creeping into her eyes, though she tried to hide it. By 3 in the morning I was near mad with terror. 8 hours of labor and no progress, her pulse fluttering, her skin slick with cold sweat. The contractions weakened, uneven now, and she was fading before my eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, clutching my hand, "something's wrong. The baby won't come right." And I knew it, but I was powerless. The book spoke of complicated births, of things a trained doctor might attempt, but I was a carpenter, not a surgeon. All I could do was sit by helpless, as the woman I loved slipped closer to death. That was when the knock came, soft, courteous, impossible in that hour, in that storm. I froze, and Rebecca's eyes, clouded with pain, flicked toward the door. We both heard it. Who would be out in such weather, and how could they even find us in that remote valley? I opened the door, and there she stood, an elderly woman, her shoulders dusted with snow, yet untouched by the cold. She was slight, her gray hair pinned back in a bun, her eyes old as stone but warm with knowledge. She carried a black leather bag, worn with age, the kind a midwife might have carried through generations. "Evening," she greeted, as though calling upon lonesome mountain cabins in the midst of blizzards was nothing out of the ordinary. "Heard you folks might be needing some help tonight." I froze, struck silent in my shock. There were no houses within 2 miles of our cabin. No way she could have possibly known anything about our trouble. Yet, before I could form a single question, she brushed past me into the room and moved directly to Rebecca's side. "Now then, honey," she spoke in a voice rich and soothing as warm molasses. "Let's see just what we've got going on here." Rebecca lifted her tired gaze to meet hers, eyes flickering between desperation and fragile hope. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Name's Granny Hawkins," the old woman replied, setting her weathered bag upon the bedside table and briskly rolling up her sleeves. "Been delivering babies up and down these ridges for 70 years, and I haven't yet come across a situation I couldn't manage. Now, let me take a good look at you." I should have pressed her with questions, should have demanded to know how she had found us, or from where she had come. But something about her presence filled the cabin with an aura of steadiness and quiet authority, a force that made me believe, against all odds, that everything was going to turn out all right. Rebecca seemed to feel it too, because for the first time in those long hours, the strain melted from her shoulders, and she gave in to rest. Granny Hawkins examined her with hands that were gentle yet sure, discovering things my own fumbling efforts had overlooked. She listened carefully to the rhythm of the child's heart with an old wooden stethoscope, checked Rebecca's pulse, her temperature, and nodded as if she had already guessed the truth. "This little one's turned the wrong way," she said plainly. "Breech position, cord looped round the neck. That's why your body hasn't been able to do its work properly, honey. We'll need to turn this baby before the world can meet him." What followed was nothing less than a master at work. Granny Hawkins adjusted Rebecca carefully upon the bed, then began a practiced sequence of movements that seemed to guide the child into place through touch alone. Her hands moved with uncanny confidence, finding angles and pressure points that coaxed our stubborn little one to yield. "There now," she murmured, as Rebecca let out a gasp of relief. "Much better. Now we can get on with the true work of bringing this child forth." The next hour passed in a haze of controlled intensity. Granny Hawkins guided Rebecca through every contraction, knowing with precision when to push, when to hold, when to breathe deeply, and when to pour every ounce of strength into the moment. She anticipated trouble before it had the chance to take shape, shifting her approach seamlessly as labor pressed forward. And then, just as the first pale light of morning stretched through our frosted windows, our son came wailing into the world. His cry rang strong, filling the cabin with the sound of life. He was perfect healthy, round, with a head of dark hair like his mother's and a jawline already hinting at his father's stubbornness. Granny Hawkins cleaned him with the efficiency of long practice, wrapped him tenderly in one of the blankets Rebecca had sewn during her pregnancy, and placed him into her waiting arms. "There you go," she said, satisfied. 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure mountain baby. Strong one, just like his mama and daddy. Rebecca wept with joy and relief, cradling him as though he were woven of gold. Color returned to her cheeks, her breathing evened out, and the looming shadow of danger finally melted away, replaced by the miracle we had prayed so desperately for. I tried to thank Granny Hawkins, tried to put into words even a fraction of my gratitude, but she only smiled softly while gathering her tools back into that worn black leather bag. "No thanks needed," she said. "Bringing babies into this world safe and sound is all the reward I'll ever ask. You to take care of that boy, and remember, mountain children are special. They come with old souls and hearts strong as the hills themselves." "How much do we owe you?" I asked, fumbling for my wallet. She laughed, the sound delicate and bright, like silver bells ringing on a spring breeze. "Can't put a price on new life, son. Just give me your word, you'll raise him right. Teach him to honor these mountains and the people who belong to them." I walked her to the door, still reeling from the enormity of what had unfolded. Outside, the snow had ceased, and the peaks beyond were gilded in pink and gold by the rising sun. A perfect day to welcome new life into our little family. "How did you know to come here?" I asked, as she paused on the porch. "How did you know we needed help?" Granny Hawkins turned, her eyes ancient and knowing. "Word travels quick in these hills, Thomas. Quicker than you think. When a child's ready to be born, those meant to help always find their way." I stood there, watching as she followed the snow-dusted road until she vanished around the bend, then stepped back inside to bask in the sight of my wife and child resting in the soft glow of morning. Rebecca was already nursing him, both of them content and radiant. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when our nearest neighbor trudged through the snow to check on us, that I learned the truth. "Granny Hawkins," Jim Patterson repeated when I told him. "Thomas, Granny Hawkins passed 15 years ago. I should know. I was the one who helped dig her grave." I gaped at him, certain there had to be some mistake. "That's impossible. She was here. She delivered our son. She saved Rebecca's life. I spoke with her for over an hour." Jim shook his head slowly. "She was the best midwife these mountains ever saw. Brought more than half the babies into this county from 1920. Clear through 1960, but she died in the winter of '63. Froze, trying to reach a woman in labor during a brutal ice storm. They found her body 3 days later, still carrying that same old black bag. The chill that rippled down my back had little to do with the mountain air. "Then who was here last night?" I whispered. Jim's voice was quiet, reverent. "Same. One who's been helping mothers in trouble ever since she passed. Folks don't speak of it much, but every midwife in these hills has heard the tales. When the need is dire, when a birth teeters between life and death, sometimes Granny Hawkins still comes." I never told Rebecca what Jim revealed. She was content, believing a living woman had saved her and delivered our child safely. And I would not darken that joy with truths she did not need. For me, though every sunrise after carried a different weight, each time I held my son, I remembered the touch of those ghostly hands, the laugh like bells, the wise eyes that had seen far beyond the veil. Some say the mountains keep their secrets, but I know better now. They keep their guardians, too. And when the snow is falling and the wind howls through the pines, I sometimes imagine Granny Hawkins still out there, walking the ridges bag in hand, ready to answer the call. Because in these mountains, some promises don't end with death, they echo forever.